There we go. Hi, everybody. This is the Baseball Hut, the amazing, spectacular, terrific, the great one, the People's Champion, your host, the Hut. And today, I'm very proud to have and very excited to have from Entercom, WINS, WCBS, CBS Sports Radio, WFAN, SNY, Sirius XM, UCLA studio host, and also someone that I know from WOR because he used to broadcast the METS games. He used to be, I guess, the after host for the after game host for the shows after the METS games, and that is Pete McCarthy. How you doing today, Pete?
Great, yeah. I was like the Steve Summers of WOR, I guess.
You used to do that show on WOR like every night or just during the week?
So I used to do that when the Mets were in season. I worked every day that the Mets played. So it was a lot for those 6 months, and I did Monday to Friday in the off season.
So you did that. Now we'll get into the what you did back then. But now the Mets have like this new owner, and Steve Cohen. What are some of your first impressions of him as an owner? Just put aside his thing that happened on Twitter a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, well, it seems like he is one of us, I guess. He is. You hoped that he would look at this like, hey, I've made all this money in the private world, and now let's have some fun with all these billions of dollars that I have and make a winner of the Mets. And I think that's the way that he's kind of walked into this, where it's not pinching pennies. He's not operating like the other 29 teams across Major League Baseball, maybe 28. We'll give the Padres some credit this offseason, but he's been aggressive, been willing to spend, has been in on, at the very least, all of the big free agents, landed Francisco Lindor. We'll see if the Mets are able to lock him up long term, but I think you got to be thrilled with what you've seen to this point.
The interesting thing, like you said, which I like, is he's got a sense of humor. When he mentioned that he wanted to have a parade for Bobby Bonilla on July 1st, I thought that was very funny. What you think of that?
Yeah, I think when he was on Twitter and interacting with the fans, it was cool to see. It was cool to see that kind of access and the back and forth. I think it was a little predictable that at some point that wasn't going to continue. I can't say a GameStop would be the reason why I thought that would stop. But, look, that was, I think, a good way for him to at least introduce himself to Mets fans, kind of gain the trust of the fan base that, he does care. He is listening. And now it's a matter of the proof will be in the pudding. Are they wearing the black jerseys or whatever people want to see? Or does he take some of the feedback that he asked for from fans and utilize it? I mean, look, wins and losses are going to be the number one thing that Mets fans judge Steve Cohen and this team for, but also things like the game day experience, making it more about the Mets at Citi Field, which has been a long time complaint, which has gotten better over the years. But, all these kinds of things are where, we'll see what kind of changes really take place in the organization.
I thought it was fun when he had that live stream with Howie Rose. And I don't know if it was a live stream, maybe it was recorded. And he took out the baseball of the Mookie ball. I don't know if you saw that.
I read about it.
That was unbelievable to see that. And it's funny that he was anonymous for all that time. People didn't know that he had purchased that ball in auction, but he does come across as very different from the other owners. I guess because he comes from this financial world, a little more down to earth. Because the Wilpons certainly would never have done any kind of like Twitter account. That's for sure.
No, I don't think the Twitter account. I thought, I thought maybe Fred was a little more
right. Yeah, I thought so.
I don't know. I didn't have a ton of interactions with either Fred or Jeff, but look, it's a new era. We know that the previous ownership, they didn't have the money to go out and just say F you and outbid the rest of the league. That was obvious with the way things have gone over the last decade plus, and we know the whole background on that. And this is a whole different world as far as that goes. And now, look, it's about spending your money wisely. And I think that Steve Cohen made a great move, bringing Sandy Alderson back into the fold to be the head man on all of this. And unfortunately, you had what happened with Jared Porter, and they'll have to figure out the general manager spot in the future. But it's interesting. I didn't think they were all that thrilled with the candidates that were out there as a potential GM anyway. And they ended up with Porter, and they say, hey, this is our guy, blah, 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 blah. But I mean, clearly in the weeks before, they were disappointed that they weren't able to get a bigger name. So look, now next off season, you go in, you have this available general manager spot, and you see if someone else shakes loose and decides to take the opportunity and the pressure that comes with an owner that says, hey, I want to win a World Series in the next 5 years.
Yeah, you mentioned this whole thing. The one thing I had said on my show, I don't know if you knew this, was that because there was a problem with the sale with the Wilpons, the sale got dragged out. Mm-hmm. And the sale wasn't official until November. So I think a big part of why they couldn't get a really good person to run the baseball operations is because they didn't have the candidates. The teams are getting ready for the GM meetings. So I think they were a little behind in terms of hiring somebody. Because most of the time during October is when a lot of guys and women start changing jobs in Major League Baseball. And I guess by the time the new ownership took over, they didn't have that ability to do that.
Yeah, I disagree with that. I think everyone knew Steve Cohen was taking over this team for months. Right. He was working behind the scenes to put stuff together. I think if somebody wanted a job, there are always back channels to make that happen. And it didn't. I know Sandy Alderson was on the sideline. He wasn't, he's working for the A's, but he wasn't a general manager at the time. But he was, able to be brought into the fold during that period. So I don't think that necessarily hamstrung them as far as finding a new general manager. I just don't think people wanted to jump in with the kind of expectations that were there for a New York club. And, look, if you don't win early, you're not going to be around all that long.
Right. So now I mentioned this for the last few days, this thing with Mickey Callaway. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's unfortunate. It's gross. I mean, to take advantage of your place as a manager in that way, and to harass, be inappropriate with female reporters. It's unfortunate. And coming on the heels of what we learned about Jared Porter as well. Yeah.
It's terrible.
Obviously, it just leaves you shaking your head. So, look, Mickey wasn't a very good manager anyway. No. So I think, for Mets fans, it's okay. Well, he's gone. He's not a part of things. But what if he was a good manager? And then this stuff comes out, right. And then it becomes a little, I think, more difficult for people to wrestle with it, I suppose. Is this a fireable offense? Is it not? I mean, the Angels are apparently wrestling with it. They merely suspended him, and they're investigating what exactly transpired. I don't know what there is to investigate. You have the receipts. You have all the text messages here of what he's been doing, apparently going back to Cleveland when he was the pitching coach there. I just don't think there's a place for that in baseball, in anywhere in 2021, in 2018, in 2015, and whatever. So, I think he's going to get what's coming to him.
Right. I agree with you. Okay. Let's get on to the good stuff. Just wanted to get that out of the way. So, how would you grade the Mets offseason? Now, they've been criticized for not picking up the big 4 free agents. But
all of them?
Well, picking up one of them at least. But they did pick up Francisco Lindor in that trade with the Cleveland Indians.
That's a little move. Hut, I got to take you to task. I was listening back to some of your shows.
Yeah.
You didn't want Lindor.
Well, the reason is a very simple thing. The reason I didn't want him is because of his size, his physical size. He's 5'11", and I have found in the past that when middle infielders are a little bit taller than him, they tend to stay more durable. Look at Derek Jeter. Look at Alex Rodriguez. Look at Cal Ripken Jr. They're over 6'2", 6'3", 6'4", and Lindor is 5'11". Mm-hmm. I got a relative who hates Jose Altuve. He's 5'5" or 5'6". He's now starting to deal with injuries now. So the size of a player, specifically in the middle infield, sometimes that tends to wear them down very quickly. That's why
I can think of some short guys that lasted a while. Ozzie Smith played for a long time. Omar Vizquel played for a long time in the middle infield.
But those guys are, those guys are the top of the heap in terms of just as a player. But
you're naming Derek Jeter and all these guys. A-Rod. I mean, come on.
I understand that, but that's just how I feel and how I see it. Plus, you don't have the amphetamines in the game anymore. That's sort of been pushed out. So that kind of has to take into account the players aren't staying more competitive into their 30s. So that's how I look at it with Lindor. Now there are other players at the middle infield, they tend to fall apart. Like Troy Tulowitzki, he fell apart pretty early in his career, but
he did. But Tulo had problems in Colorado, and it's a very tough place to play on your body. Then he ended up in Toronto, which is like the worst turf in baseball. Right. And Tulo had a couple of things working against him, and he's a big guy, as you mentioned there. But come on, of all the players that were available this offseason, the Mets didn't get the best one?
I think they did. Francisco Lindor is the best player. The closest guy.
Best player available. And the Mets didn't give up anything that exactly broke my heart. Right? I mean, Ahmed Rosario is the biggest name in the deal, and the whole idea of Rosario is that he was going to be the next Lindor. And now he is Lindor, in a way. And Andres Jimenez was fun to watch as well. I don't want to knock him. He could be a really good player. He had great instincts. But Francisco Lindor, this is a guy who's a great player, is fun to watch dude, personable dude, enjoys the game, smiling out there on the field. Maybe you weren't as familiar with him as a Mets fan, being that he was in Cleveland and in the American League. But this is a superstar who's likable, who will grow the game, make it fun to watch. This is exactly who you want to mix in with your team. And he can play a little defense, too. I mean, when was the last time the Mets actually had a good defender at shortstop? It's been a long time.
Well, Ray Adonis probably.
Really like defense versus. I'll say Jose Reyes earlier in his career was could make some big plays that were special, but I mean you look at the 2010s, you're talking about Ruben Tejada and Asdrubal Cabrera, and even Rosario was disappointing over there at the position. I mean guys that just didn't have a whole lot of range. I mean Lindor is going to make highlight reel plays, right? And we just haven't seen that at that position in a very long time. I'm thrilled about it. I think. Look, they have to lock him up long term. That's part of it, and maybe that's something that happens in spring training. Let's hope that's the case. But watching this guy day in and day out is going to be a blast. Yeah. There's some guys that just aren't as fun to watch day to day, but are great players.
Right.
Frankie Lindor isn't one of those guys.
He's one of these guys you can't keep your eyes off him.
Yeah, offensively, defensively, he's gonna make a difference in multiple ways. And again, he has a personality that I think is going to pop in New York, and we'll start to see that in spring training. And, again, he enjoys the game, and he'll fit in with a team that, I think does have a lot of fun. I mean, that was a pretty likable team over the last couple of years with, what Pete Alonso has brought to the table and Dom Smith, and you can go on down the line. I don't think there are too many players on this team right now that Mets fans are like, oh, I hate that guy, which is a rarity. There's always one guy that everyone's like, man, I don't like him.
The one thing I was surprised about Lindor is how much power he has. Yeah. How many home runs he's hit over the last few years. I was shocked.
Everybody's got power now.
Yeah.
We'll see. They say they're deadening the ball, and we'll see if that makes a difference for some of these things. But yeah, look, this is a special player. Period.
And then the amazing thing in this trade, they got Carlos Carrasco.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, as a throw-in.
Yes,
the Mets are eating the money, right? I mean, that is the biggest change from years past. I mean, you look back at the Edwin Diaz deal. The reason that trade was so bad is because the Mets were dumping Anthony Swarzak and Jay Bruce's contract. That was a big part of that deal. It doesn't get talked about anymore. It wasn't just that the Mets traded Jared Kelenic for Robinson Cano and Edwin Diaz. It was that they didn't want to take on all of the money on Cano's contracts. They dumped two bad deals that they had as part of it. And that's how you end up losing a guy like Kelenic. Now, you look at this trade, and if you're willing to take on the payroll, and Carlos Carrasco doesn't have a bad contract, it's just not something that the Indians can deal with, you got yourself a mid-rotation, number 2 type of starter just because you're willing to pony up and pay him what he's worth.
Right.
And that's where we're at.
Right. I mean, the interesting thing is we'll get to Trevor Bauer in a minute in terms of him and all that craziness, but his numbers are very similar to Bauer's, and they didn't spend nearly as much money. And the weird thing is, I didn't think that once they brought in Carrasco, they were going to sign Bauer, but they looked like they wanted to do that. Just as an aside,
They were in on Bauer, it's no doubt. They thought they had him, according to the New York Post report.
I mean, shockingly, well, we'll talk about Bauer now. What did you think? What did you think about all the stuff that was going on around him? Well, this drama and all this sort of, I guess, trolling of the Mets fans over the last few months.
Well, I saw his apology where he said he wasn't trolling Mets fans. I'm sure he wanted to be in LA. It's home for him. He went to UCLA. I'm sure he's expressed in the past that he wanted to play on a bunch of one-year deals and maximize his money. So the fact that the deal with the Dodgers is structured the way that it is, where he has opt-outs after each season, fits in with what his goal has been in the past to try to maximize what he can make year after year after year. And that's why he's making so much on a per-year basis as far as that contract goes. He wasn't interested in the 6-year, $150 million contract. He wanted to try to make $40 million per and build up from there. So I'm not sure exactly how the Mets offer was broken down, but based on what he said in the past, I think that's a part of it. I think the Mets would be a better team with Trevor Bauer. And look, you compare Trevor Bauer as your fifth starter to Joey Lucchesi or Peterson. Bauer's better, but
Right.
Bauer's not Jacob deGrom 2.0. No. Bauer won a Cy Young last year in a horrendous offensive division, the NL and the AL Central. He didn't have to pitch against anybody good except the White Sox once. Other than that, it was all bottom-tier offenses that he faced. And you look at his career, he's hardly been dominant all the way through. So I think he's a good pitcher, but he's not a great pitcher. His talent doesn't match the attention that he received over the course of this year. And I think it would have been interesting to see how he fared in New York in a bubble, in a microscope. He's a little defensive, as we've seen in the past on social media about people talking about him, and he'll swing right back and get into it. That in New York would have been interesting. It could be a distraction for whatever that's worth. And if things start going poorly early, I think it's hard for those guys to recover. Now, if you play well, you never hear the critiques and you do just fine. But if you have even 3 bad starts, it begins and talk radio gets on you and the fans get on you and social media gets on you. And if you're not thick-skinned enough to shake it off or ignore it, then it ain't going to play well in New York.
No, I mean, we remember the whole thing that happened in Kansas City when he was being taken out by Terry Francona, and he threw that ball into center field. And I had mentioned several times that Terry Francona is a Hall of Fame manager. How would Luis Rojas have reacted to that? And how would the fans here have reacted to it? Because obviously Cleveland didn't like that because 3 days later they traded him to Cincinnati.
Was it that quickly after that happened?
Yes,
and he was dealt?
It was. Well, it happened on the 28th of July, and then they traded him 3 days later.
Well, I know, he was drafted by the Diamondbacks, and they had some, disagreements on. Really, I think it was more about his training and what he wanted to do in terms of long tossing. I mean, he has different ideas about pitching and strengthening his arm. He's really fascinating. He's done this since college. He studied a lot of physics and science to try to maximize what he could do as a pitcher, which I give him a lot of credit for. And it's great if you can kind of solve your own equations in a way to make yourself as effective a pitcher as possible. And he's really been, I think, ahead of the curve on a lot of those analytical things, scientific things, biomechanic things, right, that have become such a big part of the game in recent years. And he's really maximized his ability. So full credit to him for that. It's really just a matter of, look, he likes being in the spotlight. He likes attention. And when it's positive, it's all great.
Yep.
And when it's negative, he gets a little sensitive. And look, there's going to be a lot of negative attention in New York. So look, I think he's better off in LA. It'll be better for him. And, it might be better for the Mets too. because he would be a very different personality, as we talked about before. I think the Mets generally have a pretty likable bunch,
right?
And he's. I don't think that his personality jives with what they have in that room, based on what I've seen from Trevor Bauer.
Right. I mean, he sort of has a record of, a history of not getting along with certain players, like Jared Cole with the Yankees when they played together at UCLA. Mm-hmm. So that's sort of, well, at least we don't have to worry about him. I go based on the record, obviously, like a lot of people. So I don't. He's gonna have a lot of pressure on him. Even out in Los Angeles, he's gonna have a lot of pressure out there. I mean, they just won the World Series.
It's different in LA.
I know.
People have other things to do. And I don't think there's a fan base in baseball that obsesses over their team on a day-to-day basis more than Mets fans.
Oh,
and I'd lived that on the radio for years. I've lived it as a Mets fan over the years. It's just different. It's a totally different energy. And for the Dodgers fans, look, some of them are day-to-day and care. I'm not going to say that doesn't exist. But as a whole, they're not talking about the Dodgers on talk radio every single day in Los Angeles. And especially coming off a World Series, they're going to pick it up in October. LeBron is going to dominate the conversation through at least, June, when the finals go or the playoffs end. So, and look, they're not debating the Dodgers in the way that we do with the Mets and the way that we do with baseball in New York.
That's the one thing I noticed about doing the show is how people they can't get enough of the Mets. They just want to keep talking about it. Even before, this whole thing with Steve Cohen buying the team, everybody was very they got to talk about this. Very, very loyal, I got to say. I mean, I'm a Mets fan myself, but I'm very surprised, even more so, how much people just want to talk about the team online. And I don't even know about any kind of, I'm sure there's plenty of forums out there. I'm not in any forum, but just seeing through my chat and all the regular people here, they can't get enough of the team. And they won't stop talking about it. It's just an unbelievable thing to watch.
I mean, it's incredible. Well, whether it's on WFAN, on Mets Twitter, Mets blog for all those years, and you name it, the blog. Yes, people cannot get enough of the Mets, and again, it's on a day-to-day basis, which I think has become rarer as baseball has gone along here. That you have cities that just day-to-day cannot get enough of baseball when, football has become its own daily soap opera. So, baseball is a special part of New York, its history, and the Mets, for all their trials and tribulations. Look, if the Mets won a World Series at this point, is it as meaningful as any other city winning a World Series? I know Cleveland, it's been a long time. Yeah, there's a lot of history there now, so people point to that. But you have a whole generation, maybe now a generation and a half of Mets fans that haven't seen them win, that have been teased a couple of times and, have the scars of 2006 and the disappointment of, they couldn't get over the top in 2015 and Connor Gillespie and all that kind of stuff. So, I think, when the Mets do finally get over the hump, it's going to be as wild a day as could be. And if it's as soon as, this upcoming season and maybe we got the pandemic at least mostly behind us, it's going to be a party, baby.
Oh, yeah. I mean, we came awfully close in 2015, but I felt that the Mets were going to beat the Royals because the Royals had gotten so close the year before. They were a team of destiny. But so let me ask you this. With Cohen having offered this contract to Bauer, what does that say about his ability really to spend money going forward? That's a weird, odd question, but the obvious question, I guess.
Well, it's there. I mean, the money's there. So now it's really just a matter of what's the best way to spend it, to go about it. What's plan B? So they go out, they sign Albert Almora Jr., which, again, not a big money deal, but apparently the reports are that it's not going to rule them out to get Jackie Bradley Jr. too. Right. So, if they get Jackie Bradley Jr. and then, I don't know, Jake Odorizzi, another free agent starting pitcher, it's available. It's not the same money as you're giving to Trevor Bauer, but there are multiple ways to spend your money and use it. It doesn't all have to be star power. The Mets, we've seen it. When Adam Wilk is starting games for you, you don't have depth. And that's been a big focus for the Mets. It's something that they've talked about. Now you look at this bench for the Mets, and you have Jonathan Villar, who's a part of it, and I don't think he's going to be a very popular Met, to be honest. He's a frustrating player that has a lot of talent. He'll be in a different role, being in a pure bench role here. But you mix in Almora. They apparently want to bring in some more bench players. You look at the bullpen now, and it's pretty deep. Seth Lugo's maybe the third best reliever in the bullpen now. So they've gotten a lot stronger as far as that goes. So that's been a focus. I mean, even the trade for Joey Lucchesi, you need to have those kinds of guys. You need to have someone that can step into the rotation if there's an injury, if something happens, because it's going to happen. You have to be 8 deep as far as your starting pitchers go. So that's why, they still had interest in Bauer, even after the moves they've made in the rotation, bringing in Carrasco and, as I mentioned, Lucchesi. So, and they have to add more. Look, that's a part of it. Look at the Dodgers. This is what has made the Dodgers successful. And Steve Cohen talked about this right off the bat. That's the organization that they look at. And the Dodgers are deep as hell. They've not only hit on some big signings and moves to bring guys in, they've also found the Max Muncies on minor league contracts. And when someone gets hurt, they have someone ready to step in. I mean, Alex Wood was like a swing starter for them for a long time. He's a pretty good pitcher. And those are the guys that they don't win you a World Series necessarily, but they get you over the hump into the postseason because you need that over 162 games.
The one thing that has been very frustrating to me is how many of the Mets minor leaguers that Brody Van Wagenen had traded. I want to understand the 2 years he was here, he traded about 21 minor leaguers for major league talent. And specifically a lot of pitchers like Anthony Kay and Kevin Smith and a few of these other guys that might have pitched last year instead of these other guys that you mentioned.
Brody came in, and remember, when they were searching for a general manager, Chaim Bloom was one of the options, Doug Melvin, and then you had Brody. And from what I could tell, Brody's a guy who came in and said, I can win right away. And the Wilpons loved hearing that. He felt he could probably do it without raising the payroll significantly because they really didn't over those 2 years. And so what's the plan? It's to trade prospects and bring in stars, bring in guys that he's familiar with. And, look, he vouched for Robinson Cano, and then Cano gets dinged for performance-enhancing drugs again this past offseason. Brody tried to win right away at all costs with no regard for what the future of the franchise was going to be. And if the Wilpons knew they were going to sell the team anyway, they probably didn't care about Jared Kelenic and these prospects down the line. They're not going to be around when those guys are coming up. But there's a price to be paid for those deals as you look forward. Now, the Mets, they're going to have to outspend some of those mistakes in the years ahead. It's just going to be a part of it. And it looks like they're capable of it.
Right. I mean, one of the guys that was mentioned is Sam McWilliams, who they signed him to a major league contract. He's never played in the major leagues. That was the first move they made, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you saw that. And they brought in Jose Martinez to be a bench piece, which I thought was interesting. They might not have done that if the Wilpons were running the team just as they would have been having him play every day. They wouldn't be having him on the bench, interestingly enough.
Yeah, it's where they have to be better. You have to have depth. You got to pay for depth. I think there are better examples of it in the bullpen, let's say, than Jose Martinez. But let's say if they go out and trade or sign Jackie Bradley Jr. in addition to Albert Almora, I mean, that's an example of really going after depth. It's not necessarily a need in center field right now, but that's a position they can still get a lot better in.
Do you think the DH is going to come in? They're going to agree on that?
Doesn't sound like it. I mean, I think eventually, but it's so stupid. Because Major League Baseball wants the designated hitter. The players want the designated hitter, but it's all about the negotiation. If the players are going to get the DH, which is a positive for them because that's another position where somebody can make a lot of money. Generally, DHs are veteran players that get paid well. So, the players have wanted to have this forever. But Major League Baseball is saying, okay, we'll give you the DH if you give us the expanded playoffs. And it's not really even from the union's point of view as a trade. So even though both sides want to have the universal DH, it makes sense for the game. It just it doesn't happen because they're trying to negotiate this and figure it all out. But I would guess whenever they figure out that next CBA, this upcoming offseason, then you'll have the universal DH in forever. I think at that point they'll lock it down and figure it out. But right now, it's stupid.
Yeah, I think that collective bargaining agreement negotiation is going to be really bad. I think we might have a strike next year.
Yeah, let's hope not. But there's definitely a lot of animosity on the players' side based on how things have gone over the years. It seems this offseason was maybe a little smoother than what we saw last spring when they couldn't figure out how to get the season started in the midst of the pandemic. It seems they figured it out a little easier this time, but it's still, they waited so long in the offseason to even have some of these basic conversations that, maybe it would have made sense to start the season April 28th like the owners wanted to, but they waited too damn long. And the players are like, we're already starting to throw and gear up for spring training. It's too late now to make that kind of decision. And even the DH, you're trying to build teams since November.
Right.
And nobody knows in the National League. Are we going to have a DH? Or are we not? Now it appears that there won't be a DH, but I don't know how you make that decision finalized, essentially, or maybe not even finalized yet in the middle of February.
As Mets fans, it hurts the Mets the most because they have all this glut in terms of talent.
Sure.
And they could use the DH. And they could have brought in Jackie Bradley Jr. to play center field and DH Pete Alonso.
They could DH Alonso. They could DH Dom Smith. They could DH JD Davis.
Yeah.
And they have a lot of DH types on this team. So, yes, the DH would be a great thing for the Mets, but I think they have to wait at least another year for it.
Now, we have a debate here all the time on my channel, and it seems like we have like two camps. One camp likes Pete Alonso, which I'm part of that camp, and then there's the other camp that wants Dom Smith being the everyday first baseman, and both sides want to trade the other. Where do you fall in line in terms of, is it Pete or is it Dom?
I don't think you have to choose, to be honest. I think
you neither. But
you get through. You want to have good players on your team. Right. You want to have good hitters on your team, and you find a way to make it work. Now, I don't enjoy watching Dom Smith play left field, but if he's going to go out and hit 300 and have power and bring life to the team in the way that he does, it's a net positive. I'll live with him out there in left field. If you have to take him out in the seventh inning or move him to first base and take Alonso out, if you have the lead late, fine. All about it. So to me, I'll live with it because, Dom really broke out last year. And what I have found to be so impressive really for both of them is they've kind of been competing for a long time. I mean, they knew about each other, Pete Alonso, when he was coming up, and obviously Dom Smith, who's already in the majors, was starting to be asked about Alonso and things of that nature. And the fact that they have pushed for each other and gotten along in the way they have, that's the difference. If they don't get along and there is friction between those two because they're competing with one another, then it doesn't work. And then maybe you do have to trade one away. But the fact that they've both been able to find success while the other is on the field, you can find a way to make it work. And like I said, if you got to fight through 2020 or 2021 and then look ahead to next year and say, hey, we're almost certainly going to have the DH at that point, then it makes a lot more sense. And it's a lot easier to do.
The one thing I hadn't mentioned, it was that I think Pete's personality is such that he's very accommodating. And, a lot of players might have just been like, I don't need to deal with Dom Smith, but he sort of included him in a lot of stuff, on the bench. So maybe Dom felt, he played well in spring training, 2 years ago, but didn't get the job. But the way Pete's personality is as a leader on the field, I think that made a big difference with Dom. I felt that Pete and Dom complement each other personality-wise, just in terms of on the field, off the field, and I think that made it a lot easier for Dom to be accepting from the fans, because prior to that, Dom was a bit of a problem because, he came to late during a spring training game, I think maybe that year, and he's had issues with his weight. But I think Pete has helped him along a little bit in terms of getting his personality out there more. What do you think of that?
Well, I think it's actually the opposite because remember, Dom Smith was the major leaguer first.
Right.
So if Dom Smith feels threatened by Pete Alonso coming up from the minor leagues. And, we all knew Pete Alonso was arriving and what he did at AAA Las Vegas in 2018. If Dom feels threatened or insecure about it and isn't welcoming to Pete, then you don't have this positive relationship. Right. So, I think Dom is probably the one that started him off on the right foot. And then look, Alonso breaks out in 2019. Dom's still trying to put it together. And then last year it's Dom that has the big season while Alonso struggles. So, there's been a little yin and yang there, but, it seems that they do get along. They don't look at each other as a threat. They don't have a problem playing with one another. And I don't know, it's necessarily rare in sports, but, there are ways to have both of them on the field at the same time. The Mets have done some of those things. Like I say, play Dom and left. Last year they had the DH. And, Dom's been a really good hitter off the bench when he's been asked to play in that role, which is tough to do. So, look, if Dom outperforms Alonso to the degree they did in 2020 again, look, Dom's going to be getting the majority of the playing time at first base. That's just the way it's going to be. And you hope it's positive and they can push one another. And look, like I said, I think you get through this season and you try to make the best of it. And as long as they are okay with what's happening, that's great. And then 2021, or 2022, you probably have the way to, free this whole thing, get them both in the lineup every day, no matter what, in positions that make sense.
Right. Just want to mention that we're doing this show not only on YouTube, but also on Facebook. So you need to follow me on Facebook. I should have mentioned that when we started the show, but also, okay. So now that let me go through this a little bit. The last 2 years, the Mets had Wilson Ramos behind the plate. That is an obvious question. Now you have James McCann. Now I haven't seen James McCann play on a regular basis because he's in Detroit and he was in Chicago the last year and a half. So we know that Wilson Ramos was a terrible catcher. I don't know how much you saw of James McCann. Can you tell the audience how good of a player he is or how not good of a player he is in terms of as a catcher?
Yeah, I think that's something that you have to watch on an everyday basis. And I watched a decent amount of the White Sox last year because they were so much fun to watch offensively. But McCann was kind of an afterthought and all of that. He's sitting in the bottom third of the lineup. I wasn't thrilled with the signing of McCann for all the excitement about the offseason and Steve Cohen's going to spend this and that. I thought JT Realmuto was the natural guy to go after as your number one. I'll take Francisco Lindor as a number one in the trade and kind of go in a separate route. But, if you kind of sit back and look at it, if I had a choice between Trevor Bauer and the money that the Mets were willing to throw at him or JT Realmuto, I'm taking Realmuto. So in my opinion, they erred on that where they didn't land Bauer, who's apparently somebody that they've targeted this offseason, and they might have had an opportunity to get JT Realmuto into town. So I think that was a misstep. If the Mets did sign Bauer, then I like the McCann signing a little bit more just in terms of, all right, you didn't break the bank at catcher. So now you have a stronger rotation to be a part of it. But I think the proof being the pudding with McCann, how he deals with the pitching staff day to day, watching him behind the plate day to day, should be one of the better defensive catchers that the Mets have had in a very long time. So their defense should be a lot better up the middle when you start looking at catcher, shortstop with Lindor, center field with Almora, seeing how much time he gets out there. And that's important. And that's, the Mets have been terrible defensively up the middle for a long time now. So at least they're finally starting to right that a little bit, should make it a little better for the pitchers. But I'm a watch McCann day in, day out. And I think that's the best way to get a feel, especially when you start talking about defense. The numbers don't really work 1,000%. I mean, they're a good guideline because you can't watch everybody every single day. But you see things, you notice things, and especially a catcher when some of it is ego grooming and getting a pitcher through a certain situation, knowing the right thing to say. I mean, there's a lot to that position that it's really difficult to quantify with numbers.
When you notice, the only time you notice an umpire is when they're bad. It's very similar to a catcher. If the catcher's bad, you're going to notice it. If he's a good catcher, you're not going to notice it. And I think it's a similar thing.
You notice Pudge, you notice Yadi Molina, you notice the guys that can do the special stuff.
That's true. So how concerned are you about the defense at third base with Davis playing there?
Well, I think you probably see a little bit of McNeil at third base over the course of the year, and we'll see how it all shuffles together. But yeah, JD's first impression at third base back in 2019 was awful, and wrote him off as a third baseman. I thought he was improved last year at that position, but like we talked about with Dom Smith and left, if you're going to be a below average defender, well, you got to be a really good hitter. And, like Dom Smith, look, he's got to hit 300. He's got to do this. He's got to do that. If he's going to play in left field and you live with the defense. And it's the same thing with JD Davis. You got to be able to out hit it. For other guys, if you hit, 280 with 20 home runs at third base, that's a fine season. That's not going to cut it if you're JD Davis and you're struggling defensively over there. So I feel like we kind of had these arguments with Daniel Murphy all those years ago, right? Like, you got to put up with his defense and some of the Murph plays that would just show up. But, as long as he out hit it would be okay. It wasn't necessarily, fun to watch defensively. And then obviously we know what he became as the years went on. It wasn't even a question. You didn't think about his defense if you're a Nationals fan because he's hitting at an MVP level. So that's always the balance to me. And, look, if JD Davis struggles with the bat this year, then you put more of a defense first guy over there at third base and focus on that. Maybe Luis Guillorme finds his way into the lineup a little bit more often. And there are ways to do it. And again, this is where depth comes into play. Somebody's a bad year, a down year. You don't want that to sink your whole season. You want to have somebody else, other options you can go to. And finally, it seems the Mets do have a focus on that and to try to work their way through in that way so that one guy having a bad year doesn't sink the ship.
Right. Well, I want to read a super chat from William. Is very generous. He says this for $5. Thanks, Pete, for taking time out and coming to the Huts channel. Folks like this stream. Well, thank you, William. It's very nice of you. It's very generous. It's been very nice to me the last few days, sending me quite a few chats. So we have this talk, and we're going to be talking about this a lot over the next year, is the extensions for Michael Conforto and Francisco Lindor. And what do you think? What do you think about that?
Well, I wouldn't worry about it yet.
Right.
Not many guys are signing extensions in January, even February now. These are the conversations that take place in spring training. And the guys aren't there yet. But in the next 2 or 3 weeks, you would figure that these conversations are taking off a little bit more and they matter a lot more. And once you go into the season, typically the talks die down. A lot of times the players don't want that hanging over their head when the season is taking place. It depends on how guys are. I don't know how, Conforto or Lindor will handle that kind of thing, but March is the big month for those kinds of extensions. So there's no reason to panic that Conforto doesn't have a deal, that Lindor doesn't have a deal at this point. There's still plenty of time to get that done. Once you get into April, then you start looking at it and saying, okay, like what's going to happen here? How is this going to play out? So, what kind of deals are you looking at? I would think Lindor is in that $300 million range. And, Conforto's interesting. He had a great season in 2020. He hasn't been at that level in the past. I know I've always been big on him, hearing Keith Hernandez talk him up broadcast after broadcast and talk about the pretty swing and all that. And he definitely got too power hungry in 2019 where, he was hitting home runs over like 500 feet. And I was like, dude, you don't have to swing that hard all the time. Like, just go to left center. Go to left center. You have enough power to just poke it. It's a Party City deck at Citi Field over and over. And, I feel like he got away from that and became too pole conscious. And last year he turned it around. And, when I would, host the Metrospective podcast with Tim Britton, we would talk about this all the time. Can Conforto beat Christian Yelich? It's always the guy that I looked at. Conforto can be what Christian Yelich is for the Marlins and then the big breakout season with the Brewers. And you just waited for it. And finally you saw it last year. Conforto outperformed Christian Yelich as it turned out. So, I wouldn't mind seeing Conforto have another year where he really shows he's that level of a player. And then look, if this really is the new Mets and they have money to spend, well, pony up and pay him the big bucks in free agency. I don't think that he's as important to lock up in March as Lindor. Lindor would be my focus.
Right. That's how I feel. Plus with the agent, Conforto has Scott Boras as the agent. That he's going to take that as far as he can take. He's going to go.
Not always. Look, it's up to the player. The agent works for the player. And while in the past Boras has pushed guys to go to free agency, that hasn't always been the case. And he has had plenty of guys sign extensions and before hitting free agency in recent years. I think this has been just the reputation from many years ago. They just follow all Boras clients. They all go to free agency. It's not the case. So you look at this, and I think if we're to be open to listening, to an extension with the Mets, but to me, I think there's still some uncertainty whether you're Conforto or the Mets as far as exactly what kind of player he is. Is this an MVP candidate for the next 4 years, or is this a guy who had a career year and will settle back into being, the kind of hitter he's been in the past? That's, you want to see it back-to-back years. So I don't mind the Mets waiting a little bit on this. And for Conforto, he may want to gamble on himself and say, hey, I'm a $200+ million contract guy, and I'm going to go out and put together an MVP type of season. And boom, you're going to have to pay me at that point. And if not the Mets, then somebody else will. But, look, the Mets don't have to nickel dime everything these days, it appears. So I don't mind him hitting free agency and try to lock him up then.
Ernie Delgado has a question for you, Pete. What do you think a Conforto signing looks like?
Yeah, like I said, I think right now, if you're the Mets, what are you offering? 5 years, 150? That DeGrom type of contract. And maybe he turns that down and says, hey, I could be a $200 million plus kind of guy, or, maybe he wants a longer term deal. But that's where I think he is now. And that's, I think, a fair offer would be. And that's where I do think that, there's probably two different trains of thought, where if he's going to think of himself as an MVP type player, he was going to want that, Christian Yelich contract. It's a different level. But I don't think you can pay a guy off of 1 year. And that's where you're looking at with Conforto. One great year, and then some other ones that were good and some others that were mediocre.
So now you mentioned that there are very few guys on this team that nobody likes. So I'm going to give you the name of the one player that is very controversial, and this is Edwin Diaz.
Oh, okay.
Makes
sense.
Edwin Diaz, I feel, I don't know how you think, he's the single reason why they didn't make postseason in 2019, because he gave up 14 home runs in 2019. And last year, he pitched so poorly that they took him out of the ninth inning. So
early on, and then he went back into the role and really pitched well over the last at least month and a half of last season. It was like a 2.5 month sprint. So he pitched really well for most of the year. Is that enough? Do you feel comfortable when he comes in the ninth inning? No, but he's not. He definitely moved up a few pegs over where he was after 2019. I couldn't even look at this guy on the mound in 2019, and then early on in 2020, it's just every time he came in, you just expected the worst thing to happen. And even when he got out of bad situations, it was like, I didn't need that in my life. Just win the game, just end the ninth inning. Yeah. But look, he has a lot of talent, and you hope that he figured something out last year, and that I just think it's important for him early on to have success and build on what he did at the end of last year. And then when you start having fans at games again and things like that, he's not getting booed as soon as he throws the first ball. I don't think that he's someone that handles all that well, judging how things snowballed in 2019.
Oh, he mentioned that he liked that there weren't any fans in the stands last year. He did say that at one point.
Yeah, if I was in his shoes, I would like it too. So it's going to be. That was the biggest thing for me after 2019. I talked about trade him, get whatever you can for him, because it can't possibly go well in 2020. He's going to get booed on opening day. If he comes in with a 3-run lead for the save on opening day, he's getting booed at Citi Field. And usually you don't walk into a season with that kind of target on your back. And as soon as he blows a save, he could have been perfect until May, and he blows a save on Mother's Day, he's getting booed out of the ballpark that day and the next day that he comes back in again.
Yep.
But the pandemic kind of changed everything, where there weren't any fans at the game, and I think it made it a lot easier for him to be shielded, I suppose, from the wrath of the fans. And if you're not listening to the radio or this or that and monitoring your social media, you kind of escape a lot of that stuff.
Yeah, he really concerns me, because I think that he's really, if he has a good season, this team will go into postseason. I think this team is built well enough that I think they can compete, go far in postseason. But if he doesn't pitch well, This is for any closer, but and particularly him, considering the kind of what they gave up and in the trade and over what's going on over the last 2 years. But
but what they gave up is over now. I mean, we'll always talk about it. I'm not going to say it doesn't matter, but it doesn't matter for 2021. And that is out the window. This is who you have. This is your closer. But, you finally look at this bullpen and you're like, all right, well, let's say Diaz falters. Well, you can go to Seth Lugo, who it would seem now has to accept the position that he's in as a reliever. Going to be a reliever. It didn't work last year. I don't think he was put in the greatest situation with that switch made in the middle of the season. But now Lugo's a reliever. So he's got to lock himself into that role. You have Trevor May in this mix as well. I mean, they have guys they can go to if Diaz falters. So I don't think he's a must. And this is what we talked about before, that one guy going down, Edwin Diaz having that bad 2019 wrecked the whole season. That's when you don't have any depth. That's when you don't have the next guy to go to. And that shouldn't happen. If you want to be a championship level team, you have to be able to withstand somebody not meeting expectations. And we'll see how this Mets team is fully built when the time comes. There's still a lot of free agents available out there, but it seems like they're not going to be wholly dependent on any one player. And you look back years earlier, 2017, when Yoenis Cespedes and Noah Syndergaard got hurt back-to-back in April, that was it. The season was over right then and there. So, they're in a better situation now where they're not, look, if Conforto went down day one, and look, that's a big blow, but they have other outfielders that they could throw in the mix and guys they could put out there, and they could probably withstand it. If you're talking about the irreplaceables, it's DeGrom and Lindor, but those are, two of the top 10 players in the entire sport. So, that's where, it kills you. You can't replace those guys, but elsewhere there's so much more depth than the Mets have had in the past.
How much of the hot seat is Luis Rojas going to be on?
That's a good question. He does have a relationship with Sandy Alderson going back to their previous ties in the Mets organization, but there's no doubt that this is a different job than maybe he walked into last year, in that the expectations are just so high. And whenever expectations are high, if you do not meet them, the easiest thing to do is to change the manager. So I thought he was fine last year. They didn't lose games because he made terrible moves. Mickey Callaway, I thought, was completely inept and showed it early on in his tenure. They had no understanding of how to manage a National League baseball game. Luis Rojas, you don't get that impression, though he had the DH last year, so we'll see a little bit more as far as that goes. But I think Luis Rojas is a good baseball guy, has a good baseball mind, and he'll probably figure it out, but it's not a very fair sport. It's not a very fair world, and if the Mets are hovering around 500 in July, then anything goes, and you can't change the players, they say, right? You're not going to change the general manager or, the owner or whatever it is. The manager is just the easiest thing to do. So that'll be the pressure that's on Rojas. I don't necessarily think his seat is hot yet, but it can be if this team doesn't play up to snuff.
I got another chat. This is from Mets fans only as a question. Should the Mets try to extend Noah Syndergaard before the season?
No, I let this play out. Look, he's come back from Tommy John surgery. We weren't sure about Syndergaard before he got hurt. Like, what is Syndergaard? He's looked like a superstar at times, and he's looked like a very mediocre pitcher at other times. He hasn't improved some simple things like holding runners and things of that nature. And, his fastball is, again, it's coming in 99 miles per hour, but guys seem to tee it up pretty easily. It seems pretty straight. He doesn't have any deception in his windup and his, motion there. So I don't look at him as a Cy Young contender in the way that I did 4 or 5 years ago. And it's hard to let go of those expectations once you have them for these players. So look, I want to see him come back from Tommy John, first of all. Let's see how he does. And, again, this is where I think the Mets were stupid in the past, where if you don't have a ton of money to spend on payroll, then you got to roll the dice on some of these extensions and try to lock guys up before they hit free agency. So that you're not paying market value. And really the only guy the Mets did that with was Juan Lagares, and it didn't work out. Yeah. But now, if you're not hamstrung financially, look, if he has a great season and you determine, hey, Noah Syndergaard needs to be our number 2 or 1B right behind Jacob deGrom, then you pay him. That's an option now. It's not like he's going to perform to such a degree that you can't keep him. So, that's what I think is exciting about where the Mets are right now, and how much money they might have the ability to spend is at the very least you can keep your own guys if they perform. And if they don't perform, then they're out. But you don't have to commit yourself to somebody coming off Tommy John because it makes more sense when you start looking at pennies on the dollar.
So what are your thoughts about the Mets talking to Jake Arrieta and James Paxton?
Well, there are guys that have been accomplished in the past, but have had a lot of injury issues in recent years. Arrieta wasn't very good in Philadelphia last season. They don't do a whole lot for me. Yeah. But again, you'd be looking at them as depth. You'd be looking at them as guys to compete, to be a part of the rotation when it's fully healthy. I mean, they probably have a spot the first few months until Syndergaard comes back, and then you'd look at it. But it is a little different than, signing them and saying, hey, you got to be our number 3. Yeah. You're signing them to be a number 4, number 5. And then, if they're not hacking it, then you have the ability to replace them. So they don't excite me. I'll put it that way. But the Mets do have to go out and sign another pitcher. They got to do something. I think Odorizzi's a little better option than those two, but they do need help there.
So, what are you looking forward to in terms of spring training? What are you looking for in terms of whatever?
Seeing baseball, seeing sunshine, seeing green grass. Other than that, I hate spring training. It's a waste of time. It's boring. I watched the first game, and then it's hard to watch any game after. I don't think I'm alone on that. I think it's useless. I think it gives you false impressions of guys. If someone hits 6 homers in spring, it doesn't mean they're going to go out and hit 40. It's a totally different game. You have some guys that are trying, some guys that aren't. It's a fun day when the pitchers and catchers show up. It's a fun day when the first spring training game happens and you can watch it on TV. And then the rest of it is nonsense.
Oh, did you ever do any broadcasts from spring training?
I did. I actually had the opportunity once to do play-by-play next to Howie. They were really hamstrung for somebody to be in the booth, I guess, because they had some college basketball action for Josh Lewin and Wayne Randazzo, I suppose. So I got to do one game in the booth, and I did play-by-play for 2 half innings. And to do it next to Howie, one of my broadcasting idols growing up. I mean, that was a pinch me kind of moment, kind of day. It was pretty cool. So I have that tape sitting around somewhere on my computer. But it was a thrill.
I had met Howie Rose last year before the pandemic. What a nice guy. He was very friendly.
Yeah, he was great to me. I remember when I started at WOR, maybe a little over my skis. It was a different position than I'd been in previously. And at some point early in the season, he kind of took me in and walked me around, introduced me to some people that I needed to know, and gave me some tips on how to do the job I was being asked to do. And it was incredibly helpful for me. And, I was just excited to get to, talk shop, quote unquote, with him. And, always enjoyed having him on the show over the years and getting some Mets history lessons. And one of the coolest things about, I did at WOR is, I had the opportunity to listen to all of those radio broadcasts from 2014 to 2018. And, Howie, I don't think there's anybody better than him. And I've listened to a lot of the radio broadcasters, TV broadcasters, when it's a big moment. I mean, go back and listen to the audio of Johan Santana's no-hitter. Go back and listen to that 9th inning. I mean, it is perfection as far as broadcasting goes. And, listening to Howie enough where you get the blowout game, it's fun. They're telling stories, going back and forth. He's got so much Mets knowledge You know, they don't have to do gimmicks like bust out baseball cards. You know, not to knock SNY, but it's a gimmick. And there's something to be said for keeping the radio broadcast lively, even when the game action isn't. For a game that can drag on like baseball for a long period of time when it's a blowout, and you know you have the 10th pitching change of an inning and all that kind of stuff. But how is unbelievable, keeping you engaged, keeping you laughing, and you know, and teaching you about the game at the same time. I mean, he's a gift for New York sports fans, no doubt.
Absolutely is. And don't want to forget too that Howie was a hockey announcer for a very long time. Did the Islander games, did the Ranger games. So everybody knows him here. You know, you hear his voice, you know him right away. I have a question in the chat from Ernie Delgado. Where do you see the Mets in the National League standings? Great show, Hut. Well, thank you, Ernie.
I think they're still behind the Braves a touch. I know the PECOTA standings came out yesterday and had the Mets winning the division by, I don't know, like 30 games or something ridiculous. But I still think the Braves are the class of the division. The Mets still have time to make some moves here in the next couple of weeks. But when you look at the gap between the Braves and the Mets in talent last year, it's not close.
Oh.
You know, they've closed that gap, or at least, you know, made it closer, but it's not. They haven't overcome the Braves. So to me, the Braves are still the favorite in the division. I think the Mets are pretty easily the second best team in the division. And, you know, it's more than enough to get yourself into the playoffs and see what you could do. And obviously, baseball's a weird sport. I mean, it's a ridiculous sport to try to predict. So much random stuff happens over 162 games or 154 games like they'll play this year. That, you know, it's hard to predict. It's not a fair sport. It doesn't make sense all the time. The ball bounces the wrong way, game of inches, right? All that kind of stuff. It just, it can be ridiculous sometimes. So look, if you're close to a team like the Braves within a couple of wins, hey, you catch a couple of those breaks and boom, you're over the top.
How many wins do you think that it'll be needed to win the division?
95. You got to win some games this division. Braves are really good. They have some tremendous young pitching. I understand. We'll have to see it over the course of a full season rather than the sprint that was last year. But that was always the knock on the Braves, right? That you have Ronald Acuna Jr., one of the best players in the world, but you don't have great pitching. You know, and Mike Foltynewicz is at the front of your rotation. Well, that's not the case anymore. It's a totally different Braves team as far as that goes. They're built to win. They brought back Marcell Ozuna. That lineup is still fearsome. Freddie Freeman coming off an MVP year. I give credit to the Braves. I'm not knocking the Mets and saying, hey, they're not good enough. I mean, that Braves team is really freaking good.
I thought the signing of Charlie Morton was a really good signing for the Braves. The quality pitcher, you know, he's pitched in big games, you know.
Yeah, it makes me think of the, these old Braves teams in the 90s where everyone always thinks about, you know, Glavine and Maddox and Smoltz, but they always signed somebody else to be their fifth starter who then lit it up. Like John Burkett had some big years for them. Denny Nagel came in there. They always seem to have, Steve Avery was that guy. We kind of came up with everybody else. They always seem to have that fifth starter that they would just go out and get and boom, throw in and you'd take off.
We got another chat. This is from AK Slayer 101. He wants to know what other good bullpen options can the Mets sign?
I'll be honest, I haven't looked at who's left in free agency as far as the bullpen arms go. I mean, Brad Hand was somebody that I think we all had an eye on, and he ended up in Washington. I don't think there's some great difference maker out there right now. I think the Mets bullpen actually looks pretty good. And while I do think they need to add some rotation depth, the bullpen looks okay. You can always use more, but there's no one guy I'm sitting there saying, oh, the Mets got to sign this guy. But not in February.
Right. Do you think they should resign Justin Wilson?
Does it change your opinion of the Mets if they have Justin Wilson back in the fold? It doesn't hurt, right? I mean, sure. I mean, sign who you want, but I don't think that he's an absolute must-have. Look, he pitched great 2 years ago, but they're bullpen arms, man. Like. Yeah. You can't predict these guys year to year. They're great one year. They stink the next. The only guy who's consistent for any period of time out of the bullpen was Mariano Rivera. Everybody else is up, down. You're riding the roller coaster. So, signing bullpen arms at free agency sucks, man. It's not the best way to go. What you want to have is pitching depth in your organization. And if you got to turn some starting pitchers into relievers, that's what you do. And that's why, Seth Lugo, it works out. If you have that kind of depth where, all right, you don't fit the rotation, go pitch out of the bullpen. No, Seth Lugo at times has been one of the better relievers in the National League. So, Robert Gesellman hasn't been at that level, and he made the same change, but he's a serviceable major league reliever. So that's where you want to have it. And the Mets, was it the 2018 trade deadline where they, maybe it was 17, but they traded some players away. Jay Bruce was one of them. And they got like 8 relievers, and none of those guys worked out. You don't want to get minor league relievers. You want to get minor league starting pitchers, and then they fall back and become a reliever for you. Those are the moves you want to make. So, that's where Brody's moves over the last couple of years might come back to hurt. But I'm not big on signing 80 bullpen arms in free agency. I think you want to try to build that from within.
Another guy you didn't mention was Theresa Miller. He came up as a starter. Yeah. That's probably the best example of recent time for the Mets anyway.
Yeah, I remember watching him opening day 2014, and I was like, this guy's got incredible stuff. Like, how is he pitching? He's like the 5th guy in this bullpen, and eventually he emerged and surpassed Henry Mejia and became the closer. And while I think it's a complicated relationship for Mets fans with Familia, considering how some things have gone. Look, they don't reach the World Series without Familia in 2015. No, he was fantastic. And unfortunately, he hasn't been nearly as effective since they brought him back for this second string with the Mets. But, it got a little better last year. So, look, you're not asking him to be the 8th inning guy. You're not asking him to close games. He is, again, a depth piece in this bullpen now. And it's really remarkable how they've turned it upside down by, again, you're committing to Lugo being in that pen. You bring in Trevor May. They've made some moves to shore up that area.
And they brought in Aaron Loop. I'm not familiar with him. Are you familiar with Aaron Loop?
Well, I guess he's a left-hander. He'd probably be in that Justin Wilson type of role. Yeah. And I can't say I've watched him a whole lot over the course of his career. I know he's been around for a while. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, you throw him in, you see what he's got. I mean, look, again, trying to predict relievers is a fool's errand. So
one of the things I've been sort of looking at is I don't think we're going to see a 200-inning pitcher this year, considering the pitchers didn't have a full season. Do you agree with that?
No.
No.
No, somebody will do it. Somebody will break 200 innings.
You think so?
I think you're on to something that it won't be a lot of guys, and it'll be interesting how teams balance all of that this year. But yeah, somebody's going to go out and throw. One of these guys, a veteran pitcher. Yeah, of course. Jacob deGrom, he's not going to go 200 innings?
No, but I'm thinking that, a lot of them at the most pitched, do 60 innings last year.
Well, you think the Mets got to protect Jacob deGrom this year? Let's just focus on deGrom and the one player in the Mets rotation. I think you say, boom, 200 innings. You expect it. Would you be pleased if the Mets are taking Jacob deGrom out in the 6th inning of a 1-run game because they're trying to protect him?
Well, no, but I'm thinking this because I was looking at the Mets schedule. They're going to Colorado in April and Chicago in April on a road trip. And I don't know if they should pitch him in any of those games, to be honest with you.
Well, look, you pitch. Jacob deGrom should throw as many games as he possibly can. Right. I'm not holding him back because it's Colorado. I'm not holding him back because it's cold in Chicago. He's in his 30s. He's not a kid anymore. He's been in these situations. He's your best pitcher. You want to maximize how many starts you can get out of Jacob deGrom, and he hasn't, had serious injury issues in recent years. I mean, I'm throwing that guy. I'm not going to throw him 9 innings and 140 pitches in mid-April in Colorado. I get that, but you got to let him go. We already did all this protecting Harvey and deGrom and Syndergaard, right? When all these guys were coming up, it only gets you so far, and then you got to let him free at some point. Jacob deGrom, he's off and running. Go get him, big boy. So, to me, there are no shackles on someone like Jacob deGrom. So, 200 innings, unless something goes wrong, Jacob deGrom is reaching that point. If I'm managing, I'm not holding him back. So, if we're going to ask, is anybody in the sport going to get there? Yes, somebody will throw 200.
We'll see. We'll see. Normally, I wouldn't think that, but like I said, nobody really pitched all that many innings last year. But anyway, so I think I remember hearing that you were a Mets fan. Who was your favorite Met growing up?
I kind of came up at a tough time because every time I had a favorite Met, they were gone in like 2 weeks. It felt like. So his period, I loved David Cohn, and then he was traded for Jeff Kent and Ryan Thompson. I remember crying about it. I liked Howard Johnson, and he didn't last a whole lot longer than I started watching him. Todd Hundley was someone who was there for a long time, and so he was a favorite for me as he developed into this power hitting catcher. But yeah, there wasn't like the star player. And then I tried to force it. So then you had Generation K come up, and Jason Isringhausen was phenomenal at the end of the 95 season. And so I was like, this is going to be my guy. So I bought all of his rookie cards. They're somewhere in my parents' basement on Long Island. I took my dad had given me a Mets jersey. It was like an 86 style Mets jersey, and it didn't have a name on the back. So I went out and I had Isringhausen put on the back. And it was the worst thing I ever did for multiple reasons. One, they didn't have blue lettering. So the lettering was yellow, which made no sense. But that's what I had to work with. So it was big blue 44 number on the back and then yellow Isringhausen. And the other thing that dinged me is I had to pay by the letter. So I picked the wrong guy to like. Maybe I should have gone Paul Wilson and saved a few bucks on that.
Well, my favorite player growing up was Gary Carter and Dwight Gooden, believe it or not.
Oh, you had the good years.
Yeah, I had the good years. Oh, yeah, at the big years.
Yeah, I was 2 in 86, so apparently I jumped around in my crib a little bit, but I can't say I remember a whole lot of it.
So are you for the black jersey or not for the black jersey?
I think I still have it. I've had a black jersey since high school, so I have no problem with the black jersey. I'm also, uniform stuff, I don't care. I mean, they could put advertisements on the uniform. I'm like the least person with fashion, clothing. I mean, look at me here. I'm not, it's not what I care about. I like the gray road jerseys. I think that's their best look. I think they've done well with the home jerseys with the pinstripes over the last few years. I like that look. I have no problem mixing in the black jersey. I don't want to see the black jersey every day. They wear it on Friday nights or something. That's cool with me. What I did love was that hat. There's the black hat with the blue brim. I've always liked that hat. That was my favorite Mets hat. So if they bring back that hat with the black jersey, I'm all in.
When I think of the black jersey, I think of Mike Piazza.
Yes.
It's
the Piazza years, the Ventura years, right? And that was the first good Mets team that I really had a chance to watch. So yeah, look, all this is just nostalgia. Right. It's not that this jersey looks better than the Padres mustard or brown uniform, whatever color that is. It's disgusting. It's a gross uniform. But all these people between age 38 and 50 think it's beautiful. And it's the best thing ever that they finally are wearing this color again. And it's ugly. It's an ugly ass uniform that the Padres have gone back to. But nostalgia rules all, and whatever these guys were wearing when you were 8 years old, that will forever be their best look, their best logo, and that's what you want to see. So, I mean, that's the way I think of everything. Even with the way people talk about their favorite player, it's always someone when you were like 8 years old. I did the same thing, right? I mean, Todd Hundley is certainly not the best Mets player that I've gotten to see in my 30 plus years, but favorite player, you always go back to childhood, and it's always, who is really good when you were 8 years old. And that's why Mickey Mantle's rookie card still goes for a fortune amongst all those guys that are, 60, 70 years old plus now. And it's why, with the Mets, people defend Tom Seaver. And then you have a middle generation that'll talk about Doc Gooden. And then you have now the younger generation that will forever stump for Jacob deGrom as the best Mets pitcher ever. And it's just what you see when you're young. That's what sticks with you forever. Those guys will always be the greatest. Those are the guys that and the teams and the uniforms and all that will always echo in your head.
This is a question I just thought about. Do you see DeGrom going into the Hall of Fame, or does he need to do a little bit more?
Well, he clearly needs to do more.
Right.
I think 3 Cy Youngs in 3 seasons, even with the last season being kind of a quasi season, I think that would have been really, really big for him. He probably needs to win another Cy, maybe 2. Unfortunately, just because he's not going to put up the longevity stats. And the Hall of Fame is going to get really interesting as far as pitchers go, in that you're not going to have 300 game winners anymore. You might not have 200 game winners. So, like, where are you drawing that line? How much does it matter what your compiled statistics are? And unfortunately for DeGrom, I don't know off the top of my head, what does he have, like 80 wins over the course of his career? Like, it's not a lot, and we know why, having watched day to day. It's really not his fault that the total is so low, but he's 70 wins over the course of his career. So, I mean, he's not even going to get to 150 wins in all likelihood. He'd have to pitch really well for the remainder of his contract in order to even get there. So how do you get in? When your career numbers are that low? And it's, again, we know why. He came up very late. He was his mid-20s when he finally got an opportunity with the Mets. They blow every freaking win he has. They don't score any runs for him. All these kinds of things. But I think that's going to be jarring for a lot of the Hall of Fame voters who, even if they don't look at wins right away, just the totals are going to pale in comparison to some other guys. Like, how do you compare a Jacob deGrom to a Mark Burley? Burley's that compiler type who put up a number of numbers. Look, won a World Series, had some really good seasons. Jacob deGrom's peak is higher, but you're almost looking at a Sandy Koufax type of peak that I think you have to get for deGrom to get him over the top.
And he's got the lowest win total in Hall of Fame is Sandy Koufax.
Yeah, that's what you're looking at. You have to have absolute greatness, and it helped DeGrom. He's able to do it in a World Series, and have like those big moments that Sandy Koufax had back in the day. I always think that even though everyone shies away from that stuff when they talk about Hall of Famers, it matters. It matters if you played in big games, if you had big moments. You can't just look at the regular season numbers and compare some meaningless start in September when your team's already out of the race to what a guy did in a World Series. It's the Hall of Fame. It's not just, who's the greatest or the best or who you want on your fantasy team. It's, who impacted the game as a whole. And just because your teammates stunk and you didn't get the opportunity to do it, I mean, it's unfortunate, but I'm not going to hold that against somebody that did have the chance on the highest level and won at the highest level and played their best in those biggest games. I mean, that stuff matters to me when you look at the Hall of Fame. So, that stuff could help out Jacob deGrom, but he needs another Cy Young type of season in order to really have that peak, 5-6 year unbelievable peak where he's, undoubtedly top 3 pitcher in baseball for that period of time. I think that's how you get there. I mean, Johan Santana, look at him.
Right.
He was one of the best pitchers in baseball for a 3 to 5 year period. And I mean, he hasn't gotten a sniff. So, you have to last a little bit. And that's what's tough for deGrom on the back end here.
What are your thoughts on some of the players that didn't get in the Hall of Fame this year, like Curt Schilling and Roger Clemens and Barry Bonds? Because it doesn't seem like at least 2 of those guys are going to get in. And
that's why the conversation is it's not fun to have anymore. It's not fun to talk about the Baseball Hall of Fame because Barry Bonds and Roger Clemens aren't in because of steroids. And then Curt Schilling probably gets over the hump if he's not, tweeting hateful stuff. So to me, based on what they did on the field, Roger Clemens is a Hall of Famer, Barry Bonds is a Hall of Famer, Curt Schilling is a Hall of Famer. And when I'm talking about guys that performed their best on the biggest stage, Curt Schilling's one of those guys that comes to mind. He was unbelievable in the postseason. He was the final piece for Arizona in 2001, for the Red Sox in 2004. He, put a lot of those teams over the top. So, what he did in the postseason was big time to me. You look at his record and His performance in those games, it's not just the bloody sock game for Curt Schilling when you look at his postseason history overall. But that's not the conversation. So I find the Baseball Hall of Fame conversation it's been the same conversation for 10 years. Do you care about the steroids? Do you not care about the steroids? Do you, these guys cheaters? Are they not? Can you imagine Curt Schilling giving a Hall of Fame speech and having that attention? It's just, I love sports. I love what these guys did on the field. I hated Roger Clemens, but I respected watching him at times over the course of his career. And, certainly for Barry Bonds is the greatest hitter I ever got to see. And it's not just that he hit a lot of home runs. Like, he knew the strike zone perfectly. He never swung at a pitch out of the strike zone. He'd take all those walks, right? Like, he was crazy to watch at the plate. It's why, John Franco is striking him out is such an unbelievable moment in Mets history, because, this was the guy, this was the villain. This was someone that, was always so, you always knew exactly where Barry Bonds was going to be in the lineup. So to me, I don't know, maybe it's how old you are and where these guys were, like kind of going back to that nostalgia thing and being a kid growing up. These are the best players and they're not in the Hall of Fame. I'd rather these people get in and then, put on the plaque that Barry Bonds and Roger Clemens were in the Mitchell report and that likely used steroids over the course of their career. It's just part of the history, and the Hall of Fame should be that history. I don't mind if there's an awkward day where Barry Bonds gets to give a speech about how great a player he was, and some people are sitting there saying, well, you don't break Hank Aaron's record without this or that.
Now, I don't know if you knew that, but I was thinking about this thing with Schilling. I think if Schilling, I think the media, the writers are going to put him in next year because he's the last year of his eligibility. But since he put out that statement after the vote, I thought it was such a disgusting thing that he did. Just keep your mouth shut and just wait another year. I think he would have gotten in. I don't think he's ever going to get in now.
Well,
for that,
he'll get in through the Veterans Committee, and I think looking at Schilling's the comments over the years, he doesn't have a whole lot of respect for the media, to say the least.
That's a separate issue. My view. What he did on the field is the most important thing. But
well, let me make my point. Okay. I don't think he has a whole lot of respect for the media, and we know he doesn't. And then, based on what he put out, I think he'd rather be voted in by former players, executives, and the people that are involved for the Veterans Committee, rather than getting in through the writers at this point. I think that's part of the reason that he wanted to be taken off the ballot. I don't know if he gets in next year. It's a good question. He has inched forward, but there are obviously some writers that are never going to vote him in. So that won't change come next year. Maybe it'll be a less, maybe the political climate of the country will be a little different.
That's why he shouldn't have said anything. He's kept his mouth shut for another year.
Well, that's not his nature. we know that.
I know. There's a couple other names on the Hall of Fame ballot that I thought were interesting. Scott Rowland, who went up in the vote, he looks like he's going to be getting in.
Hall of Famer.
Yeah. Gary Sheffield also went up. What do you think of him?
He had over 500 homers, hit his 500th homer with the Mets. But he did it at a time where, look, there were home runs flying out left and right. I don't like necessarily just pouring through all the numbers and going about it that way, but I don't think Hall of Fame, when Gary Sheffield's name comes up, and I think there are a lot of players like him. Like, to me, I want to see those great center fielders get in. Those guys never get a sniff. Like, Kenny Lofton fell off the ballot right away. Kenny Lofton was one of the best players in the sport at his role for many, many years with the Indians, with the Braves. I couldn't believe that he fell off as quickly as he did. Now, I understood it because the ballot was just so jam-packed in those years where maybe the timing just wasn't great. But there's like 15 guys on the ballot that hit a bunch of homers. I'd like to see, a little more defense, more balanced play in there, especially that center field position, because it seems like the center fielders just get compared to the left fielders It's not the same position. The left fielder doesn't have to do nearly as much defensively, and those are your mashers, right? Those are your big guys that, don't have a whole lot of range out there, and they're going to hit 40-plus homers and do it year after year. It's not as much wear and tear on your body. If you do it in center field, that's impressive, and those guys always get short shrift to me. So, those are the kind of guys I'd like to see get in front of, say, Gary Sheffield. Not a big Todd Helton guy either. Course field is always kind of difficult to extrapolate everything.
His vote count went up. It
looks like Helton will get in, but I wouldn't be in a.
You mentioned center fielders. Andrew Jones didn't really get that many.
Andrew Jones is the guy that should get in.
Right.
See, maybe it's because I watched him a lot more growing up, being that he was with the Braves. But Andrew Jones, people forget how great he was defensively in center field for a long time. I mean, for like 10 years, he was the gold standard in center field across Major League Baseball. And then he bulked up, put it that way. And he hit 50 homers. And then he just kind of fell off and was hurt. And the back half of his career was lousy. It's kind of like Tim Raines. Tim Raines was one kind of player for the first half of his career. Right. And then he lasted a long time as like a bench piece, was on some good Yankees teams and things of that nature. And I think, when the Hall of Fame vote came around, people remembered the second version of Tim Raines more than the first. The first version is the Hall of Fame version. Right. The second version hung on for a long time as a, depth piece. And that's kind of the career that Andrew Jones had. So to me, you got to reward those 10 years of greatness that Andrew Jones put up before he petered out in his 30s.
Right, exactly. You mentioned Tim Raines. He was the poor man's National League's version of Ricky Henderson. Yeah. I mean, he was the complement in the National League. I mean, that's how great Tim Raines was. People forget, how great he was with the Expos because he played up in Montreal all those years. He was a great player.
Yeah, I didn't get to see him in those days, on that day-to-day basis. I was a little young for that. But so I remember the second half of Tim Raines, but then you go back and you look at the Baseball Reference page, you watch some highlights on YouTube, right? I mean, we have the ability now to see all these guys in their prime to at least some degree going back. And I don't think initially I thought of Tim Raines as a Hall of Famer because, again, I saw the back half of Tim Raines. But you look at what he did, I think it's very comparable to Andrew Jones. And Andrew Jones is even better defensively in center field. Like, to me, Andrew Jones is a Hall of Famer. I like that style of player more than just, hey, you hit 500 homers, you're automatically a Hall of Famer. Home runs are cheap now. You used to be able to count all the guys that have 500-plus homers. Like, my dad used to ask that trivia question in the mid-'90s, and now you'd have no chance to come up with everybody. It's probably, 30-plus guys have 500-plus homers now. And there's so many from the same generation that you have to parse through it. And you can't compare guys that played in the 90s and 2000s to guys that played in the 30s. Like, you can't look at their home run total and say, see, they crossed this line, they're Hall of Famer. No, it's a different era. The home run is cheaper of late.
Yeah. Or even in the 70s or the 80s. I mean, you think about it, the one guy that hit 50 home runs was George Foster in the 70s. And now you see it on a regular basis now.
It's a totally different game.
Yeah.
The 80s were different too. And think about, what the Cardinals would do on the AstroTurf and Vince Coleman and Willie McGee. Like, it's a totally different game. It doesn't make sense to play it with the way that the ball jumps and the stadiums are built now, which is, why the game is the way it is. And, this is where Theo Epstein joining the commissioner's office and the story this week about them changing the baseball. This is what they want to change. You can't tell teams, hey, don't shift, or I don't believe in that. But you don't tell teams, don't try to hit home runs. You have to change the calculus, essentially. You have to change these equations that everybody is running on the spreadsheets and this, that, the other thing, right? That tell them, hey, home runs, that's the best way to score, even if it's not pretty. Doesn't matter if it's pretty to these guys. They want to win games, right? That's what keeps a general manager in his job. Well, it does matter how the sport looks if you want to keep fans engaged and involved. So you got to change the way that the sport is, change the way the inputs are, right? Change the way the ball travels. Maybe you can't really change the stadium. There's only so much that you can do. You can't say, don't try to hit home runs. You can't make a home run worth half a run, right? Like you have to find other ways to do it. So deadening the ball, I think, is an interesting experiment to see how it'll play out and if it does result in a shift in strategy.
I have a question in the chat. This is from Larry. Will Pete Rose ever make it to the Hall of Fame?
No.
I agree with you.
He shouldn't.
Yeah. He's on the ineligible list. He can't.
Yeah, we talked about the steroids before, and I was like, put Bonds in, put Clemens in, and put on the plaque what they did. But you don't have to be an expert in baseball history to know that the integrity of the sport 100 years ago now was ruined by a gambling scandal. Is a one rule. It's the one thing that was in every clubhouse. You can't gamble in the games. And even if he only did it as a manager, and even if he only did it on his team to win, no, that's the number one. It's the only rule that matters to that degree. And I know baseball has embraced gambling, and people point to that now, but you can't have the integrity of the game compromised by having the people involved in it gambling on it. You can't have a manager gambling on these things and be allowed in the sport. I mean, Pete Rose shouldn't have been broadcasting games, in my opinion. So no, that's the rule in baseball and for any sport. You can't kill the integrity of the sport. And that's the easiest way to do it. I mean, steroids, it's cheapened a lot of numbers. And for some people, it's destroyed the integrity, but at least you can kind of try to argue it. Is it cheating? Is it not? How many guys were doing, whatever it is. But there's just no doubt when you had a team throw a World Series, and we don't all remember it, we didn't live it, but this is the rule forever. Right. So no, he won't get in, and he shouldn't.
And by the way, that they have a sign in every clubhouse, not only in the major leagues but in the minor leagues, that you cannot gamble.
Come on,
and I would point out that Pete's defense was always, well, it didn't affect my team. But there's one thing that he doesn't take into account. The year after he left the Reds and was banned from baseball, Lou Piniella went in there in 1990, and that team won the World Series. So it did affect his team on the field, because every year they finished in second place. Just wanted to mention that.
Well, maybe he just wasn't a very good manager.
That's so. Now, I'm going to ask you one more question. And this was a great live stream. I'm so happy that you were able to come and talk to me for a little bit.
It's been fun, and I appreciate you having me on, Hut. And it's been nice to talk some Mets and baseball and take some questions for people. This has been great.
Can you come back again in a couple of weeks when we get into the spring training games? Yeah,
well, maybe not spring training. How about during the season? Because, like I said, I'm not going in depth on spring training if I don't have to.
All right. We're going to have time before the season starts.
Right before the season, yeah.
Okay, that sounds good. So this is the last question. It's really just a general thing, in that you were working for WO all those years, and you saw what happened. What is your thoughts with Daniel Murphy retiring in the past few weeks? What's the thing that comes to your mind when you think of Daniel Murphy?
Well, it's how he changed as a hitter in a matter of weeks. One of the cool things about the job that I worked every single Mets game. So right. I would do Mets on deck an hour before the first pitch, and then I'd hang out, watch the game. I could just lock in and watch the Mets, all 162 games, postseason, whole thing. And then I would do a post-game show after Wayne's post-game. So I had the opportunity to just lock in and watch all these games, all these at-bats. You learn the players' ticks, right? And it was amazing with Murphy, because in 2015, in July, he was one kind of hitter. And by September, he was a totally different kind of hitter. It wasn't just, this guy, boom, had a crazy October. When you watched him in August and September, all of a sudden, he wasn't going to left field. He started driving the ball into the right center field gap. And it was just a lot of doubles. But you saw he's pulling off the ball a little bit more now. That's interesting. Like, he's trying to swing with more power. And Yeah, I interviewed him. He had some weird game in Philadelphia. He had a weird play. It bounced up the pitcher's foot
Oh
and then
yeah, I
went right
remember
to
that.
him at first base or something. So we had him on. After that, I can't find either couldn't find that interview or I didn't ask him then. And the other time I interviewed him in those weeks was like David Wright had a fantasy football draft, and I interviewed Murph afterwards. But I feel like I asked him at some point about swing with more power, and I'd love to like hear his answer at that point because no one really noticed until you got into October. But I remember talking about it a lot on the air because, in my opinion, over the course of that year, people loved Murph. A lot of fans, they loved Murph. Some fans did not like Murph. But, people would argue, should we re-sign him? Should we not? And I was always, no. Like Dilson Herrera, he'll be the next guy up. All right, not my greatest hot take. But, you go to the younger guy and then you spend in some other areas. And, this is something that the Mets can do. I didn't look at Murph as this great player, but you had to adjust that thinking when he totally changed who he was as an offensive player like so quickly. And I had never seen that. Like, you see maybe season to season, a guy will change what his approach is. Right? We've seen that with Conforto over the years. But to do it in the middle of the season and so dramatically change in the way that Murphy did and to have so much success with it, where he's hitting 7 homers in the postseason, that's what will jump out to me about Murph is to be able to make that transition. I remember hearing Kevin Long, the hitting coach at the time, talk about it. And he's like, Daniel Murphy just has such a crazy ability, a hand-eye coordination to put the bat to the ball that now, just put your body into it a little bit more and pull off of it. And he still has the ability to make that kind of contact. Whereas most guys, you swing harder, you're more likely to miss. That wasn't really the case for Murph. So his strikeout numbers didn't jump and he's just hitting for more power. And the fact that his batting average went up as he made this change is crazy to me. But he was, uniquely talented in that way. And, that to me is what stands out about it because he just totally changed as a player. And then boom, postseason, everybody saw it.
Yeah, it's funny. You mentioned the home runs. I remember one year he didn't hit a home run until like August.
He never tried. He was always slapping the ball to left. I mean, that's who he was. And that's who a lot of baseball fans like, that batting average number, just see that come up. But, baseball's more than batting average. And, if you can hit doubles and homers, right, you're more valuable. And the fact that his batting average, it went up by the time he got to Washington, that it didn't hurt him to start swinging for more pop was really unbelievable. So that's always remember and will stick out to me about Murphy, just watching this transition. And then, you get to the postseason and all of a sudden he's the guy carrying the Mets and not Yoenis Cespedes that had been the case for so many months.
I think one of the things that hurt him when they went to the World Series, they had that week off against Cubs and the Royals. That really hurt his swing, I think.
Yeah, look, you're talking about 5 games, right? He wasn't hitting a home run every game the next season or the 2015 either, right? Like you have small sample sizes and, things go up, things go down. I remember that World Series at the time. I wasn't like devastated when they lost because I thought, they'll be back. This team has the pitching and now with Cespedes in the fold, like they're going to be back. And the fact that they really haven't gotten close has just been so hard to deal with over these years.
Well, the injuries to Harvey caught up with him, and Harvey sort of blew up here. That's what really hurt them a lot. And Cespedes really,
You think back, the last time Matt Harvey was when he was screaming in the dugout that he wanted to stay in the game. And from there on out, it was all downhill. He's never Matt Harvey again.
Wow.
That was it. And I wanted him to stay in the game.
Yeah.
I think they win the game if they keep Harvey in and don't mess with him. I think they win the game if they go to Familia. I think the only way they lose that game is taking Harvey out, having him go nuts, and then he's all out of breath and, like a bull in a china shop. You throw him back on the mound. I think that's the only way they lose that game. And right. Terry Collins really mismanaged that. We're already down 3-1 the series, but, just stick with your guy. He was cruising, man. Just keep Harvey in there. You had all the energy, the stadium, everything else.
Had all the momentum.
I think that they did the only thing they could do to sink that ship. And,
Well, I want to thank Pete McCarthy for coming on. You can find him on WFAN SNY Sirius XM Radio. The busy guy. I want to thank you for coming by. And this was the amazing, spectacular, terrific, a great one. The People's Champion, your host, the Baseball Hut. And I want to thank you all again for coming by and being so generous with the donations in the chats or whatever you want to call it. And again, I want to thank Pete again. And have a good day. And I'll see you later. We'll be back on later by myself. I don't know what we're going to talk about. Or maybe we'll talk about Pete. What a great interview. And have a good day. Thank you.
Thanks, Hut. Thanks, guys.